Imagine a name that echoes through stadiums, sending a shiver down the spine of every player, coach, and fan alike. A name that made wide receivers duck in fear and offensive lines tremble with anxiety. That name was Jack Tatum, a safety who was as feared for his brutal playing style as he was for his unyielding focus on victory at all costs. Tatum, known as the Assassin, didn't just play football, he dominated it, leaving a trail of devastating hits and a legacy steeped in controversy. Tatum's reign on the football field was built on aggression, toughness, and a style that blurred the line between competitive fire and reckless violence. But of all the hits he delivered throughout his career, there was one moment that would forever change not just his life but the life of another player, a moment that would haunt his legacy. On August 12, 1978, during a preseason game between the Oakland Raiders and the New England Patriots, Tatum's notorious style led to a collision that paralyzed Darryl Stingley, a wide receiver for the Patriots. That hit, the hit that would change everything, left Stingley paralyzed from the chest down and set in motion a series of events that would forever define both players' futures. Today, we discover the tragic story of Jack Tatum, Darryl Stingley, and the moment that would define both of their legacies. What started as a brutal hit in a preseason game would lead to one of the most heartbreaking chapters in NFL history. But it was also a collision of cultures, attitudes, and a game that was evolving in ways no one could have predicted. Born in 1948, Jack Tatum grew up with football in his blood. He was the kind of player who didn't just play to win, he played to destroy his opponents. As a young athlete, his physicality and aggressive style stood out immediately. He joined the Ohio State Buckeyes as a running back, but it wasn't long before his coaches saw his true potential on the defensive side of the ball. Tatum's relentless drive to tackle anything that moved made him a natural fit for defense, where he was quickly turned into a safety. At Ohio State, Tatum's role as a defensive player began to define him. He wasn't just a tackler, he was a force. He would lock in on the opposition's best wide receiver, showing no mercy, no hesitation. His raw physicality became his signature. And when the Oakland Raiders selected him in the first round of the 1971 NFL Draft, they were getting not just a player, but a weapon. The Raiders needed someone to replace the aging Dave Grayson in the secondary, and Tatum, with his terrifying playstyle, was the perfect fit. Tatum's first season with the Raiders was nothing short of electric. His debut game against the Baltimore Colts set the tone for his career, knocking out two opposing tight ends with crushing hits. He quickly earned his spot as a starter, and sports journalists began drawing comparisons between Tatum and legendary Chicago Bears linebacker Dick Butkus. His reputation was cemented as one of the most feared players in the league. But Tatum wasn't just a hard hitter, he was a player who thrived on the idea of intimidation. Every time he stepped onto the field, he sought to dominate not just physically, but mentally. His mindset was clear: win at all costs, and if someone had to get hurt along the way, so be it. In his own words, "The best thing I can do is hit somebody so hard they won't want to get up." Tatum wasn't just a product of his playing style, he was also a product of an era where players were encouraged to embrace physicality to the extreme. This was a time when the NFL's defense was expected to be ruthless, brutal, and unrelenting. For Tatum, it was more than just football, it was a way of life. And with that mindset, he carved a legacy that would be hard to forget. The NFL in the 1970s was a different world. The game was faster, rougher, and more violent than it is today. There were fewer protections for players, especially for those on the receiving end of hits like Tatum's. Back then, players were celebrated for their toughness, and coaches pushed them to give everything they had on every play, no matter the cost. And so, when Tatum squared off against the New England Patriots on that fateful August day in 1978, no one could have predicted the devastating impact his play would have, not just on the game, but on the lives of those involved. During a routine preseason game, Darryl Stingley, the 26-year-old wide receiver for the Patriots, ran a route to catch a pass from quarterback Steve Grogan. As Stingley jumped to make the catch, he lost his balance, and in that split second, Jack Tatum, coming from behind, delivered one of the most brutal hits in NFL history. The blow was devastating. Stingley's body crumpled to the ground, motionless. The sound of the collision was deafening, sending a chill through the stadium. Stingley lay still on the field as medical staff rushed to his side. His body had been crushed by the force of Tatum's hit. Two vertebrae in his neck were shattered, leaving him paralyzed from the chest down. The stadium fell silent. The hit wasn't just hard, it was catastrophic. But what shocked the world even more was that the play was entirely legal at the time. Tatum had followed the rules. He wasn't penalized and the game continued. The incident, while horrifying, was not considered an egregious foul under the standards of the time. But in the days that followed, the reality set in. Darryl Stingley's career and his life as he knew it was over. The brutal hit not only changed the trajectory of his professional career, but it also marked a turning point in the NFL's approach to player safety. The game was evolving, but the damage had been done. What followed that hit was a tale of contrasting journeys. For Darryl Stingley, his life was forever changed. No longer could he chase passes downfield, dance in the end zone, or live the life of a football player he had dreamed of since he was a child. Instead, Stingley found himself confined to a wheelchair, his future uncertain. The medical team rushed him off the field, but the damage had already been done. Stingley would spend the next several months in hospitals, facing a painful and uncertain future. He underwent multiple surgeries and began a difficult rehabilitation process, but the chances of him ever walking again were slim. His career was over and his body was broken. But the emotional toll was even more harrowing. For years, Stingley harbored deep resentment. The bitterness was compounded by the fact that Jack Tatum, the man responsible for his injury, showed no remorse. Instead, Tatum maintained that he had simply followed the game's rules and done his job as a professional football player. In Tatum's view, there was no need for an apology. He had delivered a hard, clean hit, the kind of hit that was expected of him in the violent, no-holds-barred world of 1970s NFL football. Tatum's stance created a rift that would last for years. His refusal to apologize became a defining aspect of the incident, leading to harsh criticism and fueling the public's perception of him as a villain. In interviews and media appearances, Tatum would often reiterate that his hit was not malicious, that it was just football. But for Stingley, it was more than that. It was the loss of a life he had worked so hard to build, a life of athletic achievement, a life of pride. His dreams of becoming an NFL star had been shattered in an instant. Tatum, meanwhile, moved on with his career. He continued to play for the Raiders until 1980, cementing his place in football history. But the shadow of that one hit loomed large over his career. He would never escape it, nor would Stingley ever fully recover from it. Stingley's recovery was long and arduous. He was transferred to a rehabilitation center in Chicago, his hometown, where he would undergo months of therapy. Over time, he regained slight movement in his right hand, which allowed him to operate his motorized wheelchair. But emotionally, the toll was far greater. The injury wasn't just physical, it was deeply psychological. For years, Stingley harbored resentment toward Tatum. How could he not? His dreams had been shattered in an instant, and all he received in return was silence. He resented the lack of apology, the absence of accountability. Tatum, in his mind, had taken away everything he had worked for. But as time went on, Stingley found a way to cope. He moved beyond the anger, though it never fully disappeared. He focused on his family, his rehabilitation, and finding peace with his new reality. His battle, though, was far from over. In 1980, Tatum retired from football, and a year later, he published a book titled They Call Me Assassin, in which he discussed his brutal style of play, but made no mention of regret over his hit on Stingley. The book became controversial, and his stance on the incident angered many, including Stingley's supporters. Years later, in 1996, Stingley agreed to meet Tatum. It seemed like an opportunity for closure, for both men to finally confront the moment that had shaped their lives. But when Stingley learned that the meeting was being used to promote Tatum's new book, he canceled the encounter. The bitterness remained. The unresolved emotions festered beneath the surface. In 2003, Stingley's character would shine through again. Tatum was struggling with his own health problems, having been diagnosed with diabetes, which led to the partial amputation of his leg. Stingley, having seen his own father suffer from the same disease, reached out in sympathy. Despite the years of bitterness, he offered his compassion to the man who had once taken everything from him. Stingley died in 2007, spending more than half his life in a wheelchair. He passed away at the age of 55, and in his final years he held on to a small hope that Tatum would one day apologize. But that moment never came. Jack Tatum died in 2010 at the age of 61, still standing by the belief that he had done nothing wrong. In the end, both men were victims. Victims of a system that glorified violence, a system that allowed for brutality to be seen as just part of the game. Jack Tatum's legacy would always be tied to that one hit, a moment of recklessness that would overshadow his entire career. But it wasn't just the hit that defined Tatum, it was his refusal to acknowledge the human cost of his actions. Darryl Stingley's legacy, too, is forever tied to that moment. He spent the rest of his life not as a football player, but as a man who had once stood on the edge of greatness, only to be knocked down by the violent world he had been part of. His story is one of resilience, but it is also one of regret. As for the question that lingers, should Tatum have apologized? Should he have shown some remorse for the life he shattered with one hit? It's a question with no easy answer. What's clear, though, is that the world of football, and indeed sports in general, has changed since that fateful day. The violence that once defined the game has been tempered by new rules, new protections, and a growing awareness of the physical and emotional toll the sport takes on its players. But the echoes of that hit will always remain, a reminder of the price of aggression and the complex, painful legacies of those who live by it. What do you think? Was Jack Tatum justified in his actions, or was he a product of a football culture that prioritized aggression over empathy? Do you believe Stingley's bitterness was justified, or was it a consequence of the game's violent nature? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Until next time, we'll see you in the next chapter of sports history.